The restaurant looked like something out of a magazine that night. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling like frozen drops of rain. Soft golden light covered the white tablecloths and polished floors. A grand piano stood near the large windows, facing the city skyline. Outside, the city glowed with moving headlights and tall buildings shining in the dark. Inside, everything felt calm, rich, and carefully planned. It was not a normal evening. The place had been reserved for a private celebration. A well-known millionaire was hosting a dinner party for business partners, investors, and a few close friends. Expensive suits, sparkling dresses, and the smell of costly perfume filled the air. Laughter rose from different corners of the room, controlled and confident. Every glass of water was poured at the perfect time. Every plate was placed gently and quietly. Among the staff moving between the tables was a young waitress. She wore the same black uniform as the others, her hair tied neatly back. She carried trays carefully, making sure her hands did not shake. She had worked double shifts all week, and her feet already hurt, but she kept a polite smile on her face. In places like this, the staff were expected to be invisible, efficient, quiet, and unnoticed. She preferred it that way. She had learned that blending into the background made things easier. Guests rarely looked at her face. They handed her empty glasses without eye contact. Some thanked her softly. Others did not speak at all. She did not take it personally. It was simply how places like this worked. The evening moved smoothly at first. Starters were served. Drinks were refreshed. The millionaire sat at the center table, speaking loudly, telling stories about business deals and travels around the world. People listened closely when he spoke. His confidence filled the space. He enjoyed attention. It showed in the way he leaned back in his chair and paused before finishing a sentence, making sure everyone was still listening. The waitress approached his table with a tray of sparkling drinks. She carefully reached forward to place a glass in front of one of the guests. At that exact moment, someone shifted their chair slightly. Her arm brushed the edge of the table. One glass tilted. It did not fall completely, but a small splash of water spilled onto the white tablecloth. It was not a disaster. It was barely noticeable. But in a room that valued perfection, even a small mistake felt loud. The conversation paused. She quickly grabbed a napkin and apologized softly. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice calm but slightly tight. A few guests smiled politely. One person chuckled lightly as if it were harmless. But the pause in conversation made her cheeks warm. She felt every pair of eyes near that table, even if only for a second. The millionaire looked at the small wet spot and then at her. He did not seem angry. Instead, he looked amused. "It's all right," he said casually. "Accidents happen." She nodded gratefully and cleaned the table quickly. Her movements were careful, almost too careful now. She stepped away once she was sure everything looked perfect again. As she walked back toward the service area, she heard laughter rise again. The music playing softly through the speakers continued. The night moved forward, but the small moments stayed with her. Near the large windows, the grand piano remained untouched. It had been placed there mostly for decoration. Sometimes, on special evenings, a hired musician would perform soft background music. Tonight, there was no scheduled performance. The piano stood silent, polished, almost glowing under the lights. Later in the evening, after the main course had been served, the atmosphere grew more relaxed. Guests had finished eating. Wine glasses were being refilled more often. Conversations became louder, freer. One of the guests near the center table glanced toward the piano. "It's a shame that beautiful instrument is just sitting there," he said, gesturing toward it. The millionaire followed his gaze. "True," he replied. "Music always makes things better." Another guest laughed. "Can anyone here even play?" A few people shook their heads. Someone joked about taking lessons as a child and quitting after 2 weeks. Light laughter spread across the room. The waitress was walking past again, carrying a tray of empty plates. She tried not to pay attention to their conversation. But then she heard something that made her steps slow down. "Well," the millionaire said, his voice playful. Maybe we should ask someone unexpected. He looked around dramatically, as if searching for a volunteer. His eyes landed on her. You, he said, pointing gently but clearly. Do you play? The question felt like it floated across the room and settled directly on her shoulders. For a second, she thought he might be joking. She glanced behind her to make sure he was speaking to her. There was no one else there. Me? She asked quietly. Yes, he replied, smiling. Do you play the piano? A few guests turned in their chairs to look at her. Some looked curious. Others looked entertained. Felt like the room had suddenly grown smaller. She hesitated. She could have simply said no. That would have ended it. The guests would laugh lightly and move on. The piano would remain silent. But something in the way he asked made it feel like more than a simple question. It felt like a challenge wrapped inside a joke. I used to, she said honestly before she could stop herself. A few eyebrows lifted. Used to? One guest repeated. So you can play? She felt her heartbeat quicken. A little, she replied softly. The millionaire leaned forward, clearly interested now. Well then, he said, spreading his hands dramatically. We have a piano and a willing player. Light laughter circled the table again. Oh, come on, another guest added, smiling. It'll be fun. She stood still, holding the empty tray. Her mind raced. She had not touched a piano in a long time. Life had moved in different directions. Responsibilities had grown heavier. The keys that once felt familiar under her fingers now belonged to a distant memory. I'm working, she said gently, hoping that would end it. The millionaire waved a hand casually. I'll speak to the manager, he said. Consider it a short break. More eyes turned toward her now. Not cruel. Not angry. Just curious. Waiting. She became aware of her uniform. The simple black shirt. The apron tied around her waist. The comfortable shoes meant for long shifts. She did not look like someone who belonged behind a grand piano in a room full of wealthy guests. That piano has probably been waiting all night, the millionaire continued, his tone still light but firmer now. What do you say? Just one song. There was a pause. The kind of pause where everyone expects an answer. She swallowed gently. Part of her wanted to disappear into the kitchen and avoid the spotlight completely. Another part of her felt something stir deep inside her chest. A memory of sitting in front of a piano years ago. The feeling of keys beneath her fingers. The way music once made her feel alive. The room waited. She placed the tray slowly on a nearby service table. Her hands felt strangely steady now. If it's all right, she said carefully. I can try. A small murmur moved through the guests. Some clapped lightly in encouragement. The millionaire smiled broadly, clearly pleased that his playful dare had worked. That's the spirit, he said. She untied her apron slowly. The simple action felt heavier than it should have. She folded it neatly and placed it beside the tray. For a moment, she stood there, no longer fully a waitress, not yet a performer. The walk to the piano felt longer than the distance actually was. Every step echoed softly against the polished floor. Conversations quieted as she passed. The soft background music from the speakers was turned off completely. The room grew still. She reached the piano bench and paused. Up close, the instrument looked even more beautiful. The black surface reflected the lights above. The keys were clean and perfectly aligned. Waiting. She sat down carefully. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished surface. She barely recognized the girl looking back. She took a slow breath. Behind her, the millionaire leaned back in his chair, watching with interest. The guests shifted slightly, adjusting their seats for a better view. Some folded their hands on the table. Others held their glasses midair. No one was laughing now. The room was silent. Her fingers hovered above the keys. For one brief second, doubt tried to creep in. What if she forgot everything? What if her hands trembled? What if the sound disappointed them? She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she lowered her hands toward the piano. And just before the first note could break the silence, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys, but before she pressed even one note, A memory rushed through her mind so strongly that it almost felt louder than the silent room behind her. Years ago, her world had sounded very different. There had once been a small upright piano in the corner of a tiny living room. It was not shiny or grand like the one in the restaurant. The surface had a few scratches. One of the keys made a soft clicking sound if pressed too hard. But to her, it had been the most beautiful thing in the house. She had been a quiet child. While other kids ran outside chasing each other until sunset, she preferred sitting near that piano. At first, she only pressed random keys, laughing at the different sounds. But soon, random sounds turned into simple melodies. Simple melodies turned into songs she played again and again until her fingers knew where to go without looking. Her family did not have much money, but they noticed how serious she became when she played. Her eyes would focus in a way they never did with anything else. So they made sacrifices. Extra hours were worked. Small luxuries were skipped. Eventually, she began taking proper lessons from a local music teacher who saw her potential immediately. The teacher used to say, "You don't just play the notes. You feel them." She did not fully understand that sentence at the time, but she felt proud every time she heard it. Her days became filled with school in the morning and practice in the evening. While others watched television, she repeated difficult passages again and again. Her fingers sometimes hurt. She made mistakes. She cried once or twice when she couldn't get something right, but she never wanted to quit. There was something about sitting at the piano that made the world feel clear. When she played, worries softened. Noise faded. It felt like she was speaking without using words. As she grew older, small opportunities began appearing. She performed at school events, then at small community programs. At one event, someone recorded her performance and shared it online. The video did not go viral, but it reached enough people to bring her more invitations. Slowly, carefully, a path began forming in front of her. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future built around music. She dreamed of studying at a music academy. She imagined large stages, bright lights, audiences sitting quietly as she played. She did not dream of fame. She dreamed of belonging somewhere through sound. But life does not always move in straight lines. In her final year of school, things at home began to change. A sudden health issue in the family meant hospital visits, medical bills, and long nights filled with worry. The savings that had once been meant for her education were used for treatment instead. She did not complain. At first, she told herself it was temporary. She would pause her plans for a year. She would work, help at home, and return to music soon. That was the plan. But temporary things sometimes stretch longer than expected. She took a job at a small cafe to support her family. The hours were manageable at first. She still practiced late at night when the house was quiet. The piano in the living room remained her comfort. Then the cafe closed unexpectedly. Bills did not pause just because jobs ended. So she searched again. That search led her to the larger restaurant where she now worked. The pay was better. The hours were longer. The expectations were higher. In the beginning, she told herself she would adjust her schedule and continue practicing. But exhaustion has a way of stealing energy quietly. After 10-hour shifts on her feet, her hands felt heavy. Her back ached. Some nights, she sat at the piano bench and simply stared at the keys without pressing them. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The piano at home began collecting a thin layer of dust. One evening, she closed the lid gently and did not open it again for a long time. It was not that she stopped loving music. It was that survival became louder than dreams. Family responsibilities came first. There were groceries to buy, bills to pay, appointments to attend. She learned to carry trays with balance and move quickly between tables. She learned to smile even when she was tired. Over time, people stopped asking about her music. She stopped bringing it up. Sometimes, when she passed by music stores in the city, she would slow down slightly. The sound of someone practicing scales inside would pull at something inside her chest. But she would take a breath and keep walking. She told herself she had been lucky to experience music at all. Not everyone gets that. Still, on rare quiet nights, she would imagine how her life might have looked if things had gone differently. She never blamed anyone. She never felt angry. She simply wondered. And now, sitting in front of the grand piano in the restaurant, all of those years pressed gently against her heart at once. Behind her, the guests waited in silence. They did not know any of this. To them, she was just a waitress who had casually admitted she used to play. They did not know about the early mornings of practice before school. They did not know about the teacher who believed in her. They did not know about the sacrifices made at home. They did not know about the quiet nights when she chose responsibility over rehearsals. They did not know how long it had been since she last touched a piano. Her fingers moved slightly over the keys without pressing them, as if reacquainting themselves with an old friend. The smooth surface felt both familiar and distant. She could almost hear her teacher's voice in her memory, reminding her to relax her wrists. She inhaled slowly. For a brief second, fear whispered in her mind. What if she had forgotten too much? What if her skills had faded? What if the memory of her talent was stronger than the reality? But another voice inside her was calmer. Music does not disappear so easily, it seemed to say. It waits. She opened her eyes and glanced down at the keyboard. The pattern of black and white keys looked the same as it always had. Orderly, patient. In the quiet room, someone shifted in their chair. A glass clinked softly against a plate. The city lights outside the window shimmered in the reflection of the piano's surface. The millionaire leaned forward slightly, clearly curious. Some guests expected a simple tune, maybe something light and cheerful. Others perhaps expected awkward mistakes followed by polite applause. No one expected anything extraordinary. She let her shoulders drop, releasing tension she had been holding for years. This was not an audition. It was not a competition. It was not about proving anything. It was simply a moment. And in that moment, she decided not to think about lost time or missed chances. She would not think about the long gap between then and now. She would not think about how different her life had become. She would just play. Her right hand pressed down gently on the first key. A soft note filled the air. It was clear, clean, stronger than she expected. A second note followed. Then a third. The sound wrapped around the room slowly, like a quiet introduction. It was not rushed. It was careful, almost testing the space. Her hands began to move with more confidence. Muscle memory, buried deep, started to return. The small clicking noise she remembered from her old piano was not here. Every key responded smoothly. Behind her, the room grew even quieter. With each passing second, the distance between her past and present seemed to shrink. The tired waitress faded. The young girl who once practiced for hours reappeared. And as the melody slowly began to take shape, something inside her that had been silent for years finally found its voice again. The first few notes floated gently through the air, soft and careful, like someone stepping into cold water for the first time. She did not rush. She allowed each sound to settle in the room before moving to the next. The grand piano responded beautifully, its tone rich and full, much deeper than the small upright piano she had practiced on for years. At first, the guests listened politely. A few exchanged quick glances, as if thinking, "Oh, this might actually sound decent." Someone placed a glass down quietly. Another shifted in their chair. But no one spoke. Her hands continued moving, slowly gaining confidence. The melody began to grow. It was not just a simple tune. It carried emotion. It had shape. The right hand carried a clear, flowing line while the left hand supported it with soft, steady chords underneath. She could feel her heartbeat calming with every measure. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot about the tables, the guests, the millionaire watching from the center of the room. She forgot about the uniform folded neatly behind her. All she could see were the keys and the space between them. The melody shifted slightly, becoming stronger. Her fingers began to travel more freely across the keyboard. The hesitation from earlier faded. Muscle memory returned more fully now. The movement felt natural again, like riding a bicycle after years and realizing you never truly forgot. In the room behind her, something began to change. The light laughter from earlier had completely disappeared. No one was whispering now. No one was checking their phone. Conversations that had once filled the space were gone. The only sound was the piano. One of the guests who had been leaning back casually in his chair slowly leaned forward. Another placed both hands flat on the table, eyes fixed on her back. A woman near the window pressed her lips together, surprised. The millionaire's relaxed smile began to fade, replaced by something more focused. He had expected a short, simple performance, maybe something cheerful and amateur. Instead, what he was hearing sounded polished, controlled, emotional. She moved into a more complex section of the piece. The tempo increased slightly. Her fingers crossed over each other smoothly, moving up the keyboard with ease. The notes became faster but never messy. Each one was clear. The sound filled the high ceiling of the restaurant and seemed to bounce gently off the glass windows. Even the city lights outside felt quieter somehow. Inside her, something opened. With every passing second, she felt more like herself. Not the version shaped by long shifts and tired feet. Not the version that worried about bills and schedules, but the version that once sat at a piano for hours without noticing time passing. Her shoulders relaxed further. Her back straightened naturally. Her hands no longer hovered nervously. They commanded the instrument. A soft murmur of surprise escaped from somewhere in the room when she transitioned into a dramatic passage. The melody dipped low into the deeper keys, producing a rich, powerful sound that seemed to vibrate in the air. Then it rose again, lighter and brighter. It was no longer background music. It was a performance. The guests could feel it. One man who had earlier joked about quitting lessons as a child now stared openly, his eyebrows raised. Another guest slowly shook his head in disbelief, as if trying to understand how the quiet waitress had transformed into this confident musician in front of them. The millionaire shifted in his chair. He folded his arms, not in arrogance now, but in concentration. His eyes remained fixed on her hands. The playful dare from earlier no longer felt funny. The piece continued to build. She allowed herself to pour feeling into it. Not sadness, not anger, just honesty. The years she had spent away from music, the sacrifices, the quiet nights, the longing she had pushed aside. All of it flowed gently through the keys without a single word being spoken. Some guests felt a strange tightness in their chest without knowing why. Music has a way of touching places people do not often visit inside themselves. She reached a softer section again, slowing slightly. The notes became delicate, almost whispering. The room leaned in closer, afraid to disturb the moment. A fork clinked faintly against a plate somewhere, and the sound felt too loud against the music. Then came the final build. Her fingers moved with complete confidence now. The earlier fear had disappeared entirely. She was no longer thinking about whether she would make a mistake. She was simply playing. The tempo increased. The sound grew fuller. The left hand rolled through deeper chords while the right hand danced across the higher keys. It was controlled power, not chaotic, not rushed, but strong and steady. One guest quietly whispered, "Wow!" under his breath. The millionaire blinked slowly, clearly stunned. He had not expected this. No one had. The final passage approached. She felt it before she reached it, that familiar closing phrase she used to practice over and over when she was younger. It required focus and precision. Years ago, she would repeat it again and again until it felt perfect. Now, without hesitation, her fingers found the notes. The last sequence flowed smoothly. Each note connected to the next with clarity. The sound expanded, filled the room one last time, and then gently settled. Her hands pressed the final chord. It echoed softly, hanging in the air. And then there was silence. Not the awkward silence from earlier in the evening. Not the polite pause after a simple tune. This silence was heavy with surprise. For a second, no one moved. Glasses remained mid-air. I stayed wide. It felt as if the entire room needed a moment to understand what had just happened. Then someone inhaled sharply. Another guest slowly began clapping. The sound broke the stillness like a spark. Within seconds, The entire room erupted into applause. Chairs scraped as people stood up. Some guests clapped harder than expected, almost urgently. A few even cheered softly, unable to hold back their reaction. The millionaire remained seated for one extra moment, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. Then he stood up as well and joined the applause. She remained seated at the piano, hands resting gently on her lap now. Her breathing was steady, but her heart felt full. She had not realized how much she missed this feeling until it returned. The applause continued longer than she expected. She slowly turned around on the bench to face the room. The sight surprised her. People were smiling, not politely but genuinely. Some looked emotional. Others looked stunned. The same guests who had barely noticed her earlier were now looking at her with respect. The millionaire stepped forward, walking closer to the piano. His earlier playful expression was gone. In its place was something quieter. "I didn't expect that," he admitted honestly, his voice no longer loud or teasing. She gave a small, humble smile. "It's been a while," she replied softly. He shook his head slightly, still impressed. "You don't forget something like that," he said. The guests nodded in agreement. In that moment, the room no longer saw a waitress who had made a small mistake with a glass of water. They saw a musician, a talent hidden in plain sight. And as she sat there under the warm lights, she realized something important. She had not lost her music. It had simply been waiting for her to return. The applause did not fade quickly. It rolled through the restaurant in waves, strong and real. Some guests were still standing. A few even looked at each other as if asking, "Did that really just happen?" She slowly stood up from the piano bench. Her hands felt warm, almost tingling. For a moment, she did not know where to look. The same room that had felt intimidating earlier now felt different, softer somehow. The millionaire walked closer, clapping as he approached. His expression had changed completely. The playful confidence from before was gone. In its place was something more thoughtful. "That was—" he paused, searching for the right word. "That was incredible." She lowered her eyes slightly, not out of shame, but out of habit. "Thank you," she said quietly. One of the guests near the front spoke up. "Where did you learn to play like that?" His voice carried genuine curiosity now, not amusement. She hesitated for a second. She was not used to being asked about her music anymore. "I used to take lessons," she replied simply. "A long time ago." Another guest shook her head in disbelief. "You don't play like someone who just used to take lessons." Soft laughter spread through the room again, but this time it was warm. The millionaire looked at her more closely. "How long has it been since you last played?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "Years," she admitted. That answer created another small wave of surprise among the guests. "Years? It didn't seem possible." "You've been working here all this time?" someone asked. She nodded. "Yes." The contrast hung in the air. The image of her carrying trays between tables earlier in the evening did not match the performance they had just witnessed. A woman near the window spoke gently. "Why did you stop?" It was not an aggressive question. It sounded more like concern. She took a slow breath. The room was still quiet, waiting for her answer. She did not want to share too much. She did not want sympathy. But she also did not want to hide. "Life changed," she said softly. "My family needed me. I needed to work. Music became something I had to put aside." There was no drama in her voice, no complaint, just truth. The millionaire folded his arms again, but this time it looked like he was thinking deeply. He glanced at the piano, then back at her. "I thought I was putting you on the spot," he admitted. "I didn't realize I was about to get a private concert." A few guests chuckled gently. She smiled, a little more comfortably now. "I wasn't sure what would happen either," she said honestly. One of the guests who had earlier joked about the piano stepped forward slightly. "You should not be carrying plates," he said without thinking. The comment was not meant to insult her job, but it still made her pause. She answered calmly, "It's honest work." The way she said it made the room even quieter. There was dignity in her tone. The millionaire nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "There's nothing wrong with honest work. But talent like that, it deserves a bigger stage." The words were not loud, but they carried weight. She felt something stir inside her again. Not pride exactly, but recognition. For so long, her music had existed only in memory. Now it had been heard again, seen again. A guest near the back asked, "Would you play something else?" The request came gently, almost carefully, as if they were afraid she might refuse. She looked at the piano, then back at the room. A part of her wanted to. Another part reminded her that she was still on shift. Before she could respond, the manager, who had been watching from a distance, stepped forward. His expression was mixed with surprise and relief. "It's all right," he said kindly. "Take your time." She had not expected that. The millionaire smiled slightly. "Please," he added. "One more." She returned to the bench, this time without hesitation. The walk felt different now, lighter. As she sat down again, the room settled into silence once more. But this silence was not filled with doubt. It was filled with anticipation. She began a second piece, softer this time. Slower. Something gentle and reflective. The kind of melody that makes people think about moments they had forgotten. The notes flowed easily. She no longer worried about mistakes. She trusted her hands. She trusted herself. In the audience, something subtle shifted. The performance was no longer a surprise. It was an experience. One guest quietly wiped the corner of her eye. Another leaned back and closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. The millionaire stood near the piano now instead of sitting at his table. His posture was straight, attentive. He was not the center of attention anymore. The music was. As she reached the final notes of the second piece, the applause came again, even stronger than before. But this time, it felt less like shock and more like appreciation. When she stood, the millionaire extended his hand toward her. Not as a show, not dramatically, but sincerely. "You surprised all of us," he said. "Including me." She shook his hand politely. "I didn't mean to surprise anyone," she replied. "That's the best kind of surprise," he answered. The guests slowly returned to their seats, but the mood in the room had completely changed. Conversations resumed, but now they circled around her performance. Words like beautiful, unexpected, and extraordinary floated through the air. She stepped away from the piano and picked up her apron again. For a second, she hesitated before tying it back around her waist. The simple piece of fabric felt different now. As she moved back toward the tables, people who had barely looked at her earlier now thanked her as she passed. Not just for refilling glasses or clearing plates, but for the music. "Thank you for that," one guest said sincerely. "It was moving," another added. She nodded politely each time, her smile small but real. The millionaire returned to his seat, but he did not immediately continue his stories. Instead, he sat quietly for a moment, watching her as she resumed her duties. He was thinking. The dare that had begun as light entertainment had revealed something deeper. It had revealed how easily people make assumptions, how quickly they place others into simple categories. Waitress, millionaire, guest, host. But tonight those labels had blurred. As she cleared a table near the center of the room, she felt a strange sense of calm. The earlier embarrassment from spilling water felt distant now, almost unimportant. She had walked to that piano unsure of herself. She walked away knowing something important. Her music was still hers, and everyone in that room now knew it too. The rest of the evening did not return to normal, no matter how hard anyone tried. The food was still excellent. The drinks were still flowing. The lights still glowed softly above the tables. But something invisible had shifted in the room. The earlier tone of business talk and confident storytelling had been replaced with something more thoughtful. As she moved between tables again, carrying plates and refilling glasses, the guests looked at her differently. Their eyes held curiosity now, respect, even a little admiration. One guest stopped her gently as she reached for an empty glass. "Do you perform anywhere?" he asked. She shook her head. "No. Not anymore. Not anymore? He repeated, surprised. She gave a small smile. Life gets busy. He seemed like he wanted to say more but stopped himself. Instead, he simply nodded and thanked her again. At another table, two women were speaking quietly. I had no idea, one whispered. Neither did I, the other replied. You just never know about people. Those words reached her ears, and she felt them settle in her heart. You just never know about people. Near the center of the room, the millionaire sat quietly, his earlier energy replaced with reflection. He had built his reputation on bold moves and quick judgments. He was known for taking risks and making strong decisions. But tonight, he had been reminded that not everything can be understood at first glance. After a few minutes, he stood up and walked toward her again. Can we talk for a moment? He asked gently. She nodded, slightly surprised by his softer tone. They stepped a little aside, near the large windows where the city lights shimmered below. I owe you an apology, he said directly. She blinked, not expecting that. I meant it as a joke, he continued. A little entertainment. I didn't think beyond that. I didn't think about how it might feel for you. She listened quietly. I'm sorry if I put you in an uncomfortable position. His voice carried sincerity. Not pride. Not ego. She considered his words before answering. I was nervous, she admitted. But I'm glad I did it. He looked relieved at that. So am I, he said with a small smile. Very glad. There was a brief pause between them, but it was not awkward. Why didn't you continue? He asked carefully. With music. She leaned slightly against the window frame, looking out at the city for a second before answering. My family needed help, she said. It was the right thing to do. And now? He asked. She hesitated. Now I work. He nodded slowly, understanding more than she expected. Talent like yours shouldn't sit in the background, he said. It shouldn't be hidden behind trays and uniforms. She smiled gently. It's not hidden, she replied. It's just quiet. Her answer made him pause. There was strength in her words. A few guests began gathering closer, clearly curious about their conversation. One of them, a woman dressed in a simple but elegant suit, stepped forward. I work with a small arts foundation, she said kindly. We support musicians who had to step away from their careers. If you ever wanted to return to training or perform again, we could help. The offer hung in the air. She felt her heart beat a little faster. Another guest added, I organize cultural events in the city. We're always looking for real talent. Not just noise, but real music. Suddenly, the room that had once seen her as invisible was offering her possibilities. Felt overwhelming. She raised her hand slightly, as if to slow things down. I appreciate this, she said honestly. But tonight was just a moment. It was more than a moment, the millionaire replied quietly. She looked at him. You reminded everyone here of something important, he continued. That talent doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it's standing right in front of us, and we don't even see it. The guests nodded. She felt warmth rise to her cheeks again, but this time it was not embarrassment. It was emotion. I haven't practiced seriously in years, she admitted. I don't even know if I could do this regularly. You just did, the woman from the foundation said with a soft smile. Light laughter followed, gentle and encouraging. The manager approached cautiously, unsure if he should interrupt. Instead of looking annoyed, he looked proud. You've changed the mood of the whole night, he told her quietly. In a good way. She had not thought about it that way, but he was right. The celebration felt different now. Less about status, more about connection. As the evening began to wind down, guests slowly prepared to leave. Coats were collected. Final conversations took place near the door, but many of them stopped by her on the way out. Thank you for the music, one said. Don't stop playing, another added. Promise us you'll continue, someone else insisted gently. Each comment felt like a small push forward. The millionaire was among the last to leave. Before stepping out, he turned to her once more. I meant what I said, he told her. If you decide to return to music, I'd like to help. Not because of charity. Because of respect. She met his eyes. Earlier in the night, she had seen confidence there. Then surprise. Now she saw something else, humility. I'll think about it, she replied softly. That's all I ask. When the doors finally closed and the last guest left, the restaurant grew quiet again. The lights dimmed slightly. Staff began clearing tables and stacking chairs. She walked back toward the piano one last time. The instrument stood silently, as it had at the beginning of the night. But now it felt different. Familiar. Almost like an old friend she had unexpectedly reunited with. She reached out and touched one key gently. A single soft note echoed in the empty room. The manager approached from behind. You know, he said casually, we have live music nights sometimes. If you ever want to play officially, not as a surprise, we could arrange something. She turned to him, surprised again. Really? He nodded. Why not? It would be good for the restaurant. And good for you. She felt something shift inside her once more. For years, she had believed that door was closed. Not locked violently, but gently shut. Tonight, it had opened a little. She tied her apron back on fully and picked up a cloth to help wipe down tables. Her shift was not over yet. There was still work to do, but her steps felt lighter. She was still the same person. She still had responsibilities waiting for her at home. Nothing about her situation had magically changed. Yet everything felt slightly different. Because now she knew something clearly. Her music had not disappeared. It had been waiting for the right moment. And tonight, that moment had finally arrived. The night ended like any other shift, at least on the outside. The tables were cleared. The floors were cleaned. The lights were turned off one row at a time. Staff members said their usual goodbyes and stepped out into the cool night air. But for her, nothing felt usual. As she walked home, the city sounded different. Car engines hummed. Street lights flickered. Distant voices echoed from sidewalks. Yet beneath all of it, she could still hear the piano in her mind. The notes replayed clearly, as if her hands were still moving across the keys. She did not rush her steps. For once, she allowed herself to think about something other than schedules and responsibilities. When she reached home, the house was quiet. She placed her bag down gently and stood still for a moment in the living room. In the corner sat the old upright piano, exactly where it had always been. A thin layer of dust covered its surface. She walked toward it slowly. For years, she had avoided looking at it for too long. It reminded her of a path she believed she had left behind. But tonight, it did not feel like a reminder of loss. Felt like an invitation. She ran her fingers across the top, wiping away the dust in a single line. Then she lifted the lid carefully. The familiar scent of old wood and metal strings greeted her. She sat down on the bench, which creaked slightly under her weight. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp in the corner. She pressed one key. The sound was softer than the grand piano at the restaurant. Slightly uneven. But it was real. It belonged to her. She began playing slowly, not to impress anyone, not to prove anything, just to feel it again. The melody was simple, something she used to practice as a warm-up years ago. Her fingers felt rusty at first. A few notes slipped. She paused and tried again. This time it flowed better. A small smile appeared on her face. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. The next morning, she woke up feeling something she had not felt in a long time. Excitement. She still had work that evening. Bills still needed to be paid. Responsibilities had not vanished overnight. But now there was something else inside her schedule. Something she wanted to protect. Hope. Later that day, her phone buzzed with a message from the restaurant manager. He had sent her the contact information of the woman from the Arts Foundation who had spoken to her after the performance. She stared at the message for a long time before replying. Finally, she typed a simple response. Thank you. I'll reach out. Her hands trembled slightly as she sent it. Not out of fear, but out of possibility. That evening at work, the atmosphere felt lighter. Word had spread among the staff about what happened. A few co-workers teased her gently. asking for autographs and laughing. But behind the jokes was pride. "You kept that secret well," one of them said. She laughed. "I didn't mean to keep it secret." The manager approached her before the dinner rush began. "We've decided something," he said. "Next month, we're hosting a live music evening. And if you're willing, you'll be the featured performer." She blinked in surprise. "Featured?" He nodded. "No surprises this time. No dares. Just music." The idea both thrilled and scared her. "I'll need to practice," she admitted. "That's a good problem to have," he replied with a smile. That night, after her shift ended, she did not go straight to bed. She went to the piano. Day after day, she began carving out time for practice. Early mornings before work, late evenings after dinner. Her fingers slowly grew stronger. The stiffness faded. Old pieces returned to memory like long-lost friends. It was not always easy. Some days she felt exhausted. Some nights she questioned whether she was chasing something unrealistic. But then she would remember the silence in that restaurant. The way the room held its breath. The way the applause sounded. More than that, she remembered how she felt while playing. Alive. A week later, she received a call from the woman at the Arts Foundation. They spoke for nearly an hour. Not about fame or big contracts, but about rebuilding skills, finding small performance spaces, and taking gradual steps forward. "We believe in steady growth," the woman said warmly. "Not pressure." For the first time in years, she felt supported in a way that did not feel heavy. Meanwhile, the millionaire also reached out through the manager. He wanted to attend the official performance next month. Not as a host, just as a guest. When she heard that, she smiled quietly. The night of the scheduled performance arrived faster than she expected. This time, the piano stood in the same place near the window, but everything felt different. There was a small sign beside it announcing live music. Tables had been arranged slightly closer. Soft lights focused gently on the instrument. She was not wearing her waitress uniform. Instead, she wore a simple dress. Nothing expensive. Nothing flashy. Just something that made her feel comfortable and confident. Guests filled the restaurant again, though this time many had come specifically to hear her play. Some faces from the previous celebration were there, including the millionaire. He sat quietly at a table near the front, not in the center. As she walked toward the piano, there was no teasing, no playful challenges, only anticipation. She sat down and adjusted the bench slightly. For a brief second, nerves returned. But they were different now. Not fear of embarrassment. Just the natural excitement before sharing something meaningful. She placed her hands on the keys, and she began. The first piece was strong and confident. The second was soft and emotional. Between songs, she spoke a few simple words, thanking everyone for being there. The audience listened closely. Some closed their eyes. Others smiled. The millionaire clapped the loudest at the end of each piece, not to draw attention, but out of genuine appreciation. When the final note faded, the applause filled the room once again. But this time it did not feel like shock. It felt like recognition. After the performance, people approached her not with surprise, but with admiration and encouragement. A few asked about future shows. Others simply thanked her for sharing her gift. The millionaire approached last. "You didn't just surprise us," he said quietly. "You reminded us." "Of what?" she asked. "That talent can live anywhere," he replied, "and that we should never assume we know someone's full story." She nodded gently. As the evening ended and guests began to leave, she looked around the restaurant. It was the same place where she once carried trays and tried to stay invisible. Now, it was also the place where she found her voice again. She still worked there. She still valued the job. But she was no longer just a waitress in the eyes of others, and more importantly, not in her own eyes. Her journey was not suddenly perfect. There would still be challenges ahead. Practice sessions that felt frustrating. Moments of doubt. Practical concerns about balancing everything. But she was no longer standing at a closed door. She had stepped through it. And as she placed her fingers on the piano one last time that night, playing a quiet melody for herself after the crowd had gone, She understood something deeply. Sometimes, all it takes is one unexpected moment to remind you who you truly are. And when the whole room gasped that first night, it was not just because of the music. It was because they had witnessed someone rediscover their own light.